How'd you guys do with the snow? We got a little bit of a blanket, but it's mostly rain here in central Illinois. I'd love to hear from you. Of course, starting a little late this morning, but lining some things up here last minute. So I appreciate you guys being here. But of course, Bishop on Air each and every weekday morning. I focus on stuff happening in Illinois, especially with my full-time gig with thecentersquare.com, tracking what happens at the Illinois State House. Follow me on X, follow me on Facebook, of course, like and subscribe here on YouTube. Hit that notification bell as well. I got to look at other possible channels. We've talked about that. I don't know. But good morning to everybody lining up here. Slushy rain in Chicago right now as well. So expecting even more severe weather possible over the next 24 hours or so. So just be mindful of that. Something to keep in mind. All right. So a lot going on. Of course, we've got to get to the latest in litigation against the state's gun and magazine ban. That we will do. I'm expected to talk with Dan Caulkins, state representative, Republican from Decatur. Yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court denied his request to have his case heard that was brought up in the Illinois Supreme Court. And all of the questions there, not just about equal protection or special legislation or the Second Amendment when it comes to the gun ban, but there were also some questions about the integrity of the courts and really a question of conflict of interest and whether or not some Supreme Court justices should have recused themselves. So we may get to that coming up just after 8 o'clock. But I also talked with Dan Eldridge, Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois, about the latest number estimates and how that looks to be coming together, because you've got the FOID card numbers apparently going to be updated. Illinois State Police told me yesterday that they will be updating those FOID card numbers as the registry remains open, but there's some questions about just how that seems to be kind of contradictory, and we'll hear from Dan Eldridge on that as well. But of course, I appreciate everybody checking in and joining us live each and every weekday morning. Of course, the live show is different than the clips that come out. The clips that come out later throughout the day are from the live show. So just kind of keeping my talk radio muscles flexed if I could. And I appreciate you guys letting me do that with you each and every weekday morning here, streaming worldwide, wide. All right, just some headlines that we might not necessarily delve into, but still want to try to get it out for you guys. Illinois considered the most expensive states to open a restaurant. This is an interesting study that came out of Restaurant Furniture, a website that looked at a bunch of different numbers from across the country and found that in Illinois, it's the fourth most expensive state to open a restaurant in. If you look at the breakdown here that they have in this chart, you can see that Illinois' food service costs, liquor license costs, the sales tax, the corporate tax, the minimum wage, which actually the minimum wage has now gone up to $14 an hour starting January 1st. But also looking at the cost of rent per square foot and a whole host of other things. So that's an interesting story that you might not have heard, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that, especially for entrepreneurs out there in the restaurant business. If you know anybody, send them my way. I'd love to hear from them. All right, you can have them email me, bishoponair@gmail.com. Illinois also seeing a 32% increase in the cost of health and social services. This is another story from thecentersquare.com where you can read more about the overall costs. The state of Illinois and their overall costs for health and social services, 32% increase from 2019 to 2023. Of course, you've got the COVID-19 pandemic in there, but health and social services included programs like Medicaid, temporary assistance for needy families, which is TANF, and child support. It consists of the Department of Healthcare and Family Services, the Department of Human Services, and the Department of Children and Family Services. In fiscal year 2022, health and social services made up 46% of government spending for the state. So just interesting to to track how your tax dollars are ultimately being used in all of this. And then we have how tax dollars are being used elsewhere. And you've got an Office of Inspector General report about the Department of Children and Family Services that raised continued concerns. And again, another story from thecentersquare.com. This has the Department of Children and Family Services in Illinois, which is very much an agency that's got a long history of some problems. The current director, Mark Smith, set to retire at the end of last month, but he's being kept on after Governor J.B. Pritzker announced earlier this month a replacement for Smith. Smith had been found in contempt of court multiple times for late placement of children that DCFS had custody of. There's other concerns about worker safety, those who go onto the field and try to help and monitor children. And then you've got the reports from the Office of Inspector General finding a variety of things, everything from the investigations of child death to allegations that they helped uncover of fraud within the agency. So the Office of Inspector General report that came out, you can find that at the Department of Children and Family Services website. Just search the search machines, whatever you're using, either DuckDuckGo or Google or however. But it's important to kind of see these reports and read how they're impacting you, your tax dollars, and overall, operations of the state. Illinois Supreme Court does have several cases they're going to be hearing today. That's something we're going to be monitoring with my team, the full-time gig with thecentersquare.com. But one case in particular is kind of interesting. They'll be hearing a case that's brought up people of the state of Illinois versus Demetrius Gray. And if you look at just some of the briefs here that have been filed, for this case, you can see what the case is ultimately about. And this one's interesting in as far as it's about whether or not somebody is a habitual criminal, an armed habitual criminal. So this case in particular, the Illinois Supreme Court's going to hear today, following a jury trial. Defendant was convicted of armed habitual criminal. The appellate court reversed defendant's conviction, holding that the prosecution failed to prove that he had 2 prior qualifying convictions, as is necessary to sustain an AHC conviction. Again, armed habitual criminal. No issue is raised on the pleadings, and it goes on and talks about the issues presented. So this will be kind of fascinating to see how the Illinois Supreme Court may determine what is and is not a qualifying instance of a person's criminal past to stack on and make it an armed habitual criminal. So we'll watch what happens there. Again, just a brief overview of some of the things that we're not going to delve into just to start the show, but we got a ton more to get to as well, including conversation with Dan Caulkins, state representative who had his case denied by the U.S. Supreme Court, to try to get the challenge of Illinois' Supreme Court ruling on this case when it comes to the gun and magazine ban. So we'll touch on that. But up next, let's hear from Dan Eldridge, who was the board member for Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois. He is also the owner of Maxson Shooters Supplies and Range, and he sounded off on the estimates that there are of the number of people who are actually registering for the state's gun ban registry. So stay tuned. We'll get to that coming up here with Bishop on Air. Thanks so much for hanging out. Really do appreciate you guys each and every weekday morning. Gonna take a quick breath, and then we'll be back with more. All right, it's Bishop on Air. Stay tuned.
Okay, so they say they can't change the law, and then they change the law with respect to leaving the registration window open. Which is it? It's completely incoherent how they're behaving, and it's about what you would expect for something like this that was jammed through on the last day of session written by a bunch of people who know very little about firearms.
It's Dan Eldridge. He is the owner of Maxson Shooter Supplies and also a board member of the Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois. Sounded off yesterday when I chatted with him about the numbers that he estimates complied with the state's gun and magazine ban. Here's a quick headline. It's under 10%, more like closer to 4%. But we also talked a bit about the ongoing confusion there is as to the gun ban registry and what is to be registered. So let's get right on into it. Of course, last month, Governor J.B. Pritzker, he was asked a series of questions about the gun ban registry, and those just now tuning into this saga in Illinois. January 10th, so we're in the week of a year ago. Tomorrow's the one-year anniversary of the Protect Illinois Communities Act going into effect. Governor J.B. Pritzker signing that after it's rapidly passed the Illinois legislature in a lame duck session at the beginning of the year last year. So just before the new General Assembly came in, the lame duck General Assembly passed a ban on 170 different semi-automatic rifles, shotguns, handguns, attachments, 50 caliber magazines and such. The law also included a registration that was open from October 1st to January 1st, so 3-month registration window in 2023. But in between all of that, you had lawsuits, a ton of lawsuits still working through the courts. So if you've been tracking that with me, really do appreciate it. It's Bishop on air here. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. But the governor last month was asked about at that time, maybe a couple of 1,000, 6,000, 7,000 people had registered firearms, and then it doubled to 15,000. This was mid-month last month. Here's the governor.
The percentage has changed a lot. It's gone up 50% just in the last 2 or 3 weeks. The number of people, that have registered their assault weapons.
Do you have concerns that more people who own assault weapons in this state are just going to ignore the law, and that there could be a lot out there floating after January 1st when the law is in place?
Of course, I'm concerned when people choose not to follow the law. Okay. But let's be clear, this law is intended to keep people safe across the state. It will. And the truth is that we have so much, frankly, to celebrate about the fact that Illinois is a safer state than many others. We're only the 9th state to pass an assault weapons ban. There's been a 10th since then, and I believe this will continue to grow across the 50 states. Whether it'll reach every state, maybe not, but ultimately there needs to be a federal assault weapons ban, and I favor that.
So again, the governor last month saying that he believes it's doubled, and that's a good sign of people who are registering. But when you look at the total number of FOID card registrations versus the number of actual people who registered a banned weapon, it's 1.22% of the total number of FOID cards. So close to 30,000 individuals of 2.4 million individuals, 1.22%. However, others are looking at different numbers. Dan Eldridge, Federal Firearms Licensees Board member. He is somebody who's very knowledgeable in the sale of firearms and knows where to look as far as the percentages of estimates that there are. But really, what are those estimates? And is this something that you can really sink your teeth into and say, this is the number? That's kind of tough to do.
Of course, here's
Dan Eldridge.
Okay, so it's always difficult to get a good read on firearm ownership in general, by household in particular. So what we did is we said, well, how many FOID card holders are there? Let's assume that most FOID card holders are firearms owners. And then go to the Washington Post study, which, the Washington Post is not exactly a right-wing organ of the media. And their study in spring of last year, came up with 20% of gun owners own an AR-15. Okay, so we have that to start with. We have the FOID card holders, we have that that own AR-15s, but now we have to expand that a little bit or quite a bit, because the broad reach of this act covers much more than AR-15s. So we started looking at what else is there that's covered, and how many do we think there are out there if we use the AR-15 as a scaler. Of the AR-15s and AK-47s that we sell combined, 85% of that total would be AR-15s and 15% would be AK-47s. Great, so we can bump the AR number up by 20% or so. Uh, Additionally, there are AR pattern pistols, there are AK pattern pistols, there are shotguns that are banned by this, there are handguns that are banned by this. There's just a whole host of other firearms. And so we're just making some wild guesses about how many of these covered items are out there, applying that percentage to the FOID card list. And yeah, you come up with a pretty low number. Now, it was pointed out to me that it might be too aggressive to say that most FOID cards represent gun owners, because there are households, for example, where a domestic partner, husband, wife, whatever, may get a FOID card when the other partner owns a firearm. That's certainly possible. So, okay, let's say that only half the FOID, let's say that's the case across all Illinois households, that you have two FOID cards for every gun owner. Well, okay, great. Now we're at what, 8.4% compliance? We're still well under 10% compliance, and that's being extreme. You can look at RAND Corporation surveys that showed 22% of households own guns. Illinois has, I think, 5 million households. So right now you're at 1.1 million owners. 20% of that is 220,000 ARs, plus the other bits and pieces. Let's say that's 300,000 gun owners that are supposed to be registering their stuff under this act. You're still under 10% compliance. So no matter how you slice it, the compliance is very low. The danger with these surveys of gun ownership is that they almost certainly underestimate how broad gun ownership is. Think about it. You're sitting at home and somebody calls you up, a stranger calls you up on the phone and starts asking you about what guns you own. It's not unreasonable to think that a large number of people will just say, no, I don't own any, and leave it at that. So these are absolute best case numbers for the state, that you're under 10% compliance. We think it's closer to 4%. It's just a mass rejection of this act.
So again, my conversation with Dan Eldridge yesterday, I also asked him about how there's still confusion. Listen, I get a lot of your emails out there, a lot of your comments about what is a banned firearm, what is a banned attachment that needs to be registered. I mean, people even tell me that they're registering their magazines, which is not necessarily the case. So, there's still a lot of confusion about what needs to be registered. But if you recall, Judge McGlynn in the Southern District of Illinois denied moving forward with a preliminary injunction against the state's ban and registry because of challenges that it was too vague. And the judge said it wasn't vague, it was clear. And he did say Second Amendment aside, but Eldridge did correct me in the assumption that, the judge said it was not vague. And key term here, unconstitutionally vague.
Okay, so it's always difficult to get a good...
Dan, let's do it here and go.
Okay, first off, the courts have not said that it's not unconstitutionally vague. We are getting to that in the merits trial before Judge McGlynn here this month. He declined to grant a preliminary injunction on the basis of vagueness, simply because it appears he wants to get to the meat of the matter. He wants to go on to the merits hearing rather than enjoin the state from enforcing the registry, and then the state appeals to the 7th, and the 7th stays it, and we've now burned another 3 months. So on the merits, the vagueness is a great claim, and it's only made stronger by this circus. You mentioned the Ruger 1022. There are, I believe, 7 million of those out there. Now, half of the Ruger catalog for 1022s would be covered by PICA for pistol grips, for shrouds, for any number of features. This is a 22 rimfire rifle that most kids that get into guns would own. So right there, you've got whatever Illinois' portion is of 3.5 million guns. It's insane how many things are covered by this, potentially. What the state police has done is they've produced a flow chart to determine if your gun is banned, in addition to the list of banned firearms. And they were empowered to write rules about how to administer this act. The rules largely are about the registry, and they were done on an emergency basis in the dark of night, the 11th hour, in such a way that there's no way around that implementation. So what's covered is a great question. As I point out in the blog piece, you've got the Lake County State's attorney and the governor both claiming that magazines have to be registered. You have the governor additionally claiming that automatic weapons have to be registered. Neither of those is true. The word automatic, or the term automatic weapon, is nowhere mentioned in the act itself. If it's a select fire rifle that can fire automatic or semi-automatic, sure, it may be covered.
So he's talking about the Lake County State's attorney, and we flashed his Facebook account that says that under the Protect Illinois Communities Act, Illinois residents who possess assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and other devices listed in the act are required to submit an endorsement affidavit electronically. So that's interesting. You don't have to register your magazines, according to Illinois State Police. Even the governor last month indicating people are registering all kinds of stuff.
Well, that's an exaggeration that often occurs in right-wing media. The reality is that most people really do understand these rules. And by the way, people are actually signing up, registering their automatic assault weapons, their high-capacity magazines, rather. And as we get closer to it, we're seeing more and more people actually do what they're required to do under the law.
So again, the governor reacting to people registering all kinds of stuff, automatic firearms, he says, or high capacity, high speed magazines, he says. Eldridge says there's a lot of confusion here, and that type of stuff doesn't really help.
Two of the people that are tasked with enforcing or promoting this act don't even know what's in it. And so it really doesn't matter what the state police says is a banned item. All that matters is the opinion of the law enforcement officer who arrests you, the prosecutor who prosecutes you, and the judge that tries the case. And that's sort of the definition of vagueness. Nobody knows what's in there. And when people ask us, we simply tell them our opinion doesn't matter.
So I also asked Eldridge to elaborate a bit on some other things, and he talked about how the Illinois State Police have said that they are going to keep the registry open past January 1st. And the statement that I got from Illinois State Police said that the FOID portal will remain open for people to submit endorsement affidavits. ISPs focused on compliance and safety, they said, while the Act set deadlines for submitting endorsement affidavits, it does not set forth penalties for late submissions. So Eldridge went on to discuss the issue of state police and where they're at on enforcement and ultimately how they're going to react to this stuff.
One thing, the state police has said that they're processing some number of affidavits still. So these numbers could change. Another interesting wrinkle of this is that the state police has said that the registration window is still open, even though the deadline for registry is passed. Well, that's interesting. They say they won't prosecute people who register late, but that doesn't enjoin a Cook County or Lake County state's attorney from prosecuting you. If you register something after December 31st, well, you're memorializing the fact that you illegally possessed it for some period of time. Who in their right mind would do that? I just can't imagine. And so there's that. There's also all of the Freedom Week guns and the guns that were bought by people that were operating under the TRO, the three TROs that were out there earlier last year. The state police has said, sorry, we can't, there's no provision in this law for us to let you register your guns. Okay, so they say they can't change the law, and then they change the law with respect to leaving the registration window open. Which is it? It's completely incoherent how they're behaving, and it's about what you would expect for something like this that was jammed through on the last day of session, written by a bunch of people who know very little about firearms.
That's Dan Eldridge, Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois. He, of course, is knowledgeable in estimations of what kinds of firearms people own as a gun dealer and supplier and shooting range manager there with Maxon's Shooters Supplies in Des Plaines. So greatly appreciate him connecting with us and sharing his thoughts. So where do we go from here? Of course, the law is still being challenged in the courts. We'll talk next with Dan Caulkins, who took his case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. But after conference on Friday and orders published Monday, Caulkins' case not going to be heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. So we'll talk about that next year with Bishop on Air. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can like, subscribe, follow along, tell your friends about the show, support the program by checking out some of the merchandise below, and stay tuned. Much more coming up here with Bishop on Air. Tomorrow's the one-year anniversary of the Protecting Illinois Communities Act here in Illinois. That is the ban on more than 170 semi-automatic firearms, from rifles to handguns to semi-automatic shotguns and so on, plus attachments and a whole bunch more. But all of this, of course, includes a registry that was supposed to have a deadline January 1st. The Illinois State Police say that they are going to keep that registry open. But you've also got the ongoing lawsuits that remain open. We've got Judge Stephen McGlynn in the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court. He's going to have a scheduling conference on Friday with a case challenging the state's gun and magazine ban on Fifth Amendment grounds. So we'll be watching that closely. But you also had state-level cases that were brought forward, and one in particular by State Representative Dan Caulkins, touching on a variety of things from special legislation to violations of equal protection and the Second Amendment. But there were issues about also judicial integrity in the mix of all of that with the Illinois Supreme Court. Challenges going all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court after the Illinois Supreme Court sided with the state back in August after denying recusal motions. So the question then went in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, but after conference on Friday, they published orders Monday, and they denied cert for State Representative Dan Caulkins' case. He joins us now to react to that here with Bishop on Air. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I'm doing this from the comfort of my own home, so I appreciate you guys tuning in and being part of the program. Representative, let's get right on into it. Your reaction to yesterday's order announcement. Oh, I apologize. Let me put you back on. I had you on mute, but go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, disappointed for sure. You know, we felt that we had a very, very, I guess, perfect Caperton case. Unfortunately, I think the U.S. Supreme Court's docket is jam-packed. We were one of about 150 appeals that they rejected. yesterday morning. I'm sure all of us felt that we had, a worthy case that the U.S. Supreme Court should take up, but they're not obligated to take anything. And if you kind of pay attention to what's going on in the news right now, they're certainly very, very busy with a lot of national implication, issues, the Trump ballot, the abortion issue, the ATF overreach issue. So, we gave it our best shot. We certainly hope that they would intercede and help us here in Illinois with a corrupt Illinois Supreme Court, but it didn't happen. So that pretty well shuts things down for us. Although we do have some other legal avenues that we're looking at.
Can you talk about that at all? What that could possibly be? Maybe a different state level lawsuit, or maybe a different federal lawsuit. Obviously, the questions still remain in separate cases that are dealing with things from the Second Amendment to the Fifth Amendment arguments, the vagueness arguments, and so on. Even Tom DeVore has cases he's trying to revive in state court. What else could you possibly be looking at when it comes to the legal side of things in the courts?
Well, there was an issue that came up after we filed with the U.S. Supreme Court, an issue that you covered, the pretty in-depth, a $7.3 million super PAC that was set up by the lawyer that works for the Senate president, that was used to defame the Republican candidates and promote the Democrat candidates. And none of that was disclosed to the public, for that matter, until you and some other reporters started digging into it. When the Illinois State Board of Elections issued a $99,500 fine for 35 campaign finance violations, the alarm bells went off. It caused us to amend our pleadings to the U.S. Supreme Court. But it also, I think, has implications for the Illinois Supreme Court for not having divulged those contributions when we were at trial.
Representative, what legislatively could happen with this? Because I know that there's always questions about, for instance, judicial transparency and investigations that could possibly be done. I know we have a judicial inquiry board where a lot of people, from my understanding and indication, is that they filed for requests that this whole situation be reviewed by the Judicial Integrity Board. So what legislatively can be done, right, with the separations of powers from the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch? What can you guys do in the State House to possibly curb this type of activity?
Well, that's a great question, and we've tried unsuccessfully for the last 5 years. I mean, that I've been in the General Assembly, to have some impact on the ethics code of ethics. I don't know that the General Assembly can impose a code of ethics on the Illinois Supreme Court. I know that the Chicago Bar Association, when we filed our appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, also sent a letter to the U.S. Supreme Court asking them to set up a code of ethics, for the Illinois Supreme Court, or maybe courts in all cases. But I think there's a separation of power issue here. I don't know that the legislative branch is in a position to dictate, ethics guides to the Illinois Supreme Court. I think it's up to them, and it's very disturbing that the obvious is not obvious to them. It's more about the politics. It's more about doing whatever is necessary to retain Democrat control of the Illinois Supreme Court. I think if not to go to the point that the judges are biased, I have my questions, but it's the standard is the appearance. And anyone now going before the Illinois Supreme Court in a case against the state of Illinois, particularly Governor Pritzker, are going to face the same questions. Am I going to get a fair hearing at the Illinois Supreme Court? I think we have a serious ethic problem. I think that these two judges are corrupt in the legal sense, and not talking about them personally. By the contributions from the executive branch and the legislative branch, and that's not the Republican form of government that we serve under, and that's a small R Republican. Obviously, there's huge issues here, so I don't know how they're going to address it. I see serious problems with any case that comes before the Illinois Supreme Court now.
Well, you talked about the code of ethics and how you guys can't necessarily dictate to the Illinois Supreme Court or any courts really how to have their ethics, so to speak. But what about the campaign contribution side of this? I mean, $1 million split 50-50 with the governor's account and his trust as well. But then you've got the stuff that happened with the Senate President's program. So what can be done about, I don't know, curbing that type of spending?
Well, when the people that wrote the campaign finance laws, break their own law. I mean, they break their own campaign finance laws, and by having some loophole that they figured out, or maybe they knew it all along when they drew up the contribution limits. I don't know that they're going to be willing to close that loophole. Again, it's a moral, ethical problem that we have in Illinois when we have a multi-billionaire governor who will spend whatever he wants to get what he wants. And we have members of the General Assembly who are able to raise, obscene amounts of money and spend it to get what they want. On top of which, we haven't even touched on the maps and the drawing of the maps and why the maps were redrawn.
And you're talking about the Illinois Supreme Court maps as well, not just the legislative maps.
Yeah. Right. We haven't redrawn Illinois Supreme Court maps in over 50 years. And I was told personally by the Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court that it would be virtually impossible to redraw the maps because of what it would do to the circuits, how it would affect the other courts, the district courts and the appellate courts in Illinois. And man, as soon as he got unretained, wow, we got new Supreme Court maps to ensure that their candidates were going to get elected. So, again, it goes to what can you do? I mean, you have gerrymandered districts, and that wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough that they had gerrymandered districts, that they had to put almost $10 million into the campaigns of these two judges to get them elected. It's frustrating at best, and I think it says a whole lot about politics in Illinois for sure.
We'll be watching this closely as well as to your next steps, if there are legal steps or what we could possibly see happen. State Representative Dan Caulkins, greatly appreciate you taking the time with me this morning.
Always. Good to hear from you, and thank you again.
Absolutely. It is Bishop on Air. Thank you so much for tuning in to all of you as well. Greatly appreciate it. And you can check out the program again, follow along, hit the notification bell. If you want to support the program, get some merchandise below. All right. It is time to say goodbye on this Tuesday. Tomorrow is, of course, the 1-year anniversary of the Protecting Illinois Communities Act being put into place, and we will do a kind of live-to-tape documentary of sorts. So looking forward to putting that together and finishing that out. So it'll be tomorrow here with Bishop on Air. Of course, we'll cover any developments that happen, but it's going to be a longer program. I'm going to try to start a little bit earlier, maybe right at 7:30, maybe even a little earlier than that, because there's a lot to unpack from the past year, and I've got hundreds of clips that we're going to be sharing. So thank you so much for tuning in. It is Bishop on Air here on Facebook, X, also YouTube. So like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, all right? All right, somebody asked in the chat what time the show typically starts. 7:35, 7:40. I think today was like 7:45, close to 7:50. Had to do some engineering here, you know, I mean, wires and such. But yeah, I appreciate you guys tuning in and being here each and every weekday morning. And we'll be here tomorrow. All right, so have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day. It's only Tuesday, right? And be safe in that snowstorm. All right, we'll see you back here.